Welcome to Bermuda's live interview with the Premier, David Burt. I'm Don Burgess. Mr. Premier, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have an interview with Bermuda's #1 news site.
It seems like I got to talk to you last Thursday with the by-election results. What would you say how that reflects how you and your government are running Bermuda at this time?
I think that the by-election results, where we were able to narrow the margins in both seats and actually flip one seat from the opposition to the government, is an endorsement of our time in office over the past 11 months. I think what you have seen is that we laid out a plan that we would execute once we're elected into office, and we've been following on that plan, whether it was the pledges of which we made in our 100-day plan or whether or not it was the things that were laid out inside of our throne speech. We have executed on those plans, and I think that the stability of which we've brought to the country, the sense of community of which we brought to the country, the sense that we can work together to solve the problems which are facing Bermuda, I think that that is appreciated by the voters of those constituencies, and I think that was reflected in the results.
Last July, when the election was held, there was a huge swell of vote change, and from there, even now to the work seat, you had another double-digit change. So, do you feel like everyone's catching on to how things are going, and they're going, well, we're very pleased with this?
I would say that I think that by and large people are pleased, but that doesn't negate the significant amount of work that is left to be done and the challenges that the country faces. Our economy still can do much better than it is. The Minister of Education is working diligently on delivering on our promises of public school reform. The Minister of National Security is working diligently on tackling the root causes of crime and violence and making sure that we can address those social challenges. So there's a number of things of which the government continues to address. But I think the results reflect, I guess I would say, an overall satisfaction with the direction that we are leading the country. And that is personally gratifying, but it's also a measure of work that is not only for myself, not only for my cabinet colleagues who sit around this table on a Tuesday, but also for our entire team and those the backbenchers who make sure that we stay online and challenge us every week in caucus, and our Senate team who do an admirable job of advocating for the government's policies in the upper house.
You're closing in on the 1-year anniversary of being the government. What would you say are the most significant accomplishments that you've done so far?
Well, I would say that I think the biggest point of pride for myself would have been that the way in which that the government has been able to advance the country's fintech ambitions, and coming from a place that was regarded as an afterthought in the area of fintech to now the first country that has passed legislation that will set up a licensing regime for digital asset businesses. I think one of the best compliments that we could have possibly had was from a company in New York, which said that the Bermuda government moves at the speed of a startup. I think that there will be many people that would question that, and certainly that doesn't happen in all areas of government. But the combination of work between the Bermuda Monetary Authority, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of National Security, and private sector partners, whether they be the ones, the law firms, the accounting firms, has gotten us to this point. And I think that it is an incredible accomplishment to go from basically from 1 year not being on the map at all to now being one of the most sought after fintech jurisdictions in the world. So from that perspective, that is without a question a point of pride. But I'm also proud of the work that the Minister of Education has done insofar as making sure that we're having additional investments in education, providing additional training opportunities for Bermudians, the work that's happening in the Ministry of National Security, where we're talking about addressing and tackling the root causes of violence, the work that's being done in the Ministry of Public Works in ensuring that the infrastructure needs are kept up and making sure that we address a lot of the challenges that have been placed. So I think there's a wide area inside of our government, or whether we can talk, I'm sure we'll talk later about the sugar tax. There's lots of points of pride, but I think the ultimate thing is that we are executing on the things which we laid out inside of our platform and our throne speech.
Let's talk a little bit about fintech, cryptocurrencies, blockchain. People are still trying to catch on to what these terms mean and how it's going to benefit the average Bermudian. You recently signed a slate of memorandums of understanding with different companies. Just pick one or two and how that's going to translate into jobs for Bermuda, or how that's going to help the economy.
The translation to jobs is very simple. And the reason why I say the translation of jobs is very simple is that our Digital Asset Business Act, which passed the Senate yesterday and will be receiving royal assent either tomorrow or next week, requires companies that are licensed in this space to have a physical presence here in Bermuda. That is the exact same as what we see with the insurance industry, and that is the exact same as which we see with the banking industry. And so from our perspective, this is just the first step. We must understand that the major insurance markets in Bermuda did not develop until after 1986. It took us 30 years to get to where we are. And the fintech market will be no different. It might move a little quicker, but we are at the very early stages. The view and the vision of this government is to establish a sound regulatory environment and to establish an excellent place where companies can look to do business, and supplement that with the training which is necessary to ensure that Bermudians can participate in this space. And the participation of Bermudians in this space will not just be working. When some of the memoranda and understandings which we sign will make money available for Bermuda-based companies. We've already seen one company that's set up a joint venture and invested $1 million in a Bermuda-based company, which is going to start deploying solutions in e-identity, which means that by next year, I'll be able to tell the public of the country that you no longer have to fill out multiple forms for your bank every year, that we'll be able to do it one time in one central location and be able to have that information automatically transferred to a number of government departments and number of banks. These are the type of developments that will happen, and we will see more companies investing in this space. What we have to do is we have to finish going through the process. So the first step was the ICO legislation. The second step was the Digital Asset Business Act. The third step will be finalizing the regulations which will apply for token offerings. And then the fourth step will be finalizing the regulations which are going to apply to the Digital Asset Business Act. After that, we need to make sure that we have the banking piece solved, where there'll be announcements from the government on how we're going to solve that piece. And I'm relatively certain that within the next 2 months, you'll begin to see more companies that will sign leases, that will begin hiring, that will begin setting up, and will begin their philanthropic efforts here in Bermuda. So what I would say is that we're just getting started. If I can set it aside, I think that it's a very apt comparison to make. When we were in New York last month at the Bermuda Executive Forum, Brian O'Hara said that the same things of which he is hearing said about the fintech industry in Bermuda are the same things that they were saying about the insurance industry in Bermuda in 1986. That was 32 years ago. Look where we are now. I think that if that is the best type of endorsement that we can possibly ask for, and we are continuing to work and push on this path.
I think part of this, though, is like I hear some people express concerns, is because every week you're seeing stories about the number of ICOs in cryptocurrencies that are frauds, or you see exchanges being hacked or manipulated. How does Bermuda prevent us getting tainted in with the rest of that?
That's precisely why we're doing what we're doing. That is precisely the reason why we're setting up a sound regulatory framework. That is precisely the reason why the Bermuda Monetary Authority has taken the lead to make sure that business on our shores that is done inside of this space will be done with the highest standards. That is precisely the reason why Bermuda will be successful, because there are so many different places where are not regulating these activities, where customers can be exposed to risk, and where businesses may not be able to act in the best possible fashion. That is the reason why we're doing precisely what it is that we're doing, and that is the reason why we'll be successful. My encouragement for people who do not necessarily have a full grasp of understanding is to get educated, to visit our website, fintech.bm, which has excellent starting modules that will tell you about the various items of what fintech can mean, not only for Bermuda, but to get yourself involved, participate in the community conversations and discussions of which we've been having, and to understand that this is going to be a space of the future. But what I will say, Don, is for every person who has a criticism, there are also people who laud us for our approach and are active in looking on how they can play a part of this industry going forward.
Getting back to the jobs question with regard to this, where do you see the range of jobs coming to Bermuda? From what sort of positions?
One of the main spaces will be regulatory compliance, because compliance is going to be a big field, making sure that we do the customer due diligence, the anti-money laundering checks, know your customer, etc. That is going to be a big area, and as I've said previously in the House, that's an excellent area for those persons, particularly middle-aged persons who have found themselves their jobs outsourced from our local banking sector. But in addition, we're going to see more jobs that are going to be created as the government looks to reform its banking laws to make sure that we can actually bank the assets which are coming inside of the digital asset space. So I think that there will be space for those things to happen. In addition, there's going to be the regular technology jobs, which I think are without question very important. And so there's two levels in which we put to that. There are those persons who have experience in technology already and can then advance their ambitions in technology to have a specialization, or they can be those people who may want to enter in technology field and then can start at that point at an entry level. The final place, of course, will be without question cybersecurity, as there are rules and requirements that the Bermuda Monetary Authority will set out on the security requirements for any business practicing in this space. And the government will be soon launching an initiative for additional training in cybersecurity, because we want to make sure that Bermudians participate in this industry, and we are going to provide the training to enable this to happen.
One of the things you brought up in the last month or so is independence. Why do you think that's important for Bermuda?
I think that independence is an ultimate aim and objective of the Progressive Labor Party. Has been there inside of our Constitution, and I think that that will never change. I take issue with you saying that I've raised the specter of independence. I think that it has to be kept in the context of the speech which I gave. The speech which I gave was a celebration or a special joint session of the 50th anniversary of Bermuda's Constitution. And the reason why Bermuda's Constitution is different than all of the other overseas territories is that Bermuda's Constitution was written as a pre-independence constitution, with the expectation that Bermuda would go independent shortly thereafter. That is not the case, and our Constitution has been tested and tried. What is important that we recognize is that for Bermuda to take its place on the world stage, we have to advance our constitutional relationship. The fact and form and fashion of what that will be, we do not necessarily know, but it is incumbent on us as a government, as a party, and as a people to discuss how we can do things better and how we can be more effective as Bermuda. Let me give you a perfect example. Right now, Bermuda is embroiled in trying to make sure that we have effective relations with the European Union. The Bermuda government is spending lots of money on consultants in Europe, and the decision was made by the cabinet that we should have a permanent representative in Brussels to reduce the amount of money of which we're spending and to increase our contacts inside of the European Union. We had to submit that request to the United Kingdom government, and we've waited 4 months for that response. These are the type of things that happen with our constitutional relationship, and that presents a challenge. It's the same things we're talking about negotiation of air routes. There's many things we're talking about shipping. There are lots of things that we're encumbered by. So whether it's independence, whether it's additional steps insofar as modernizing our Constitution, these are all things that responsible government should talk about and that responsible community should talk about, and how can we make sure that Bermuda can achieve its goals and objectives in the best way possible. But here's the thing. What I've said on numerous occasions to the people of Bermuda is that independence is not part of our current mandate. You will not find independence inside of our platform, and you will not find Bermuda going independent any time during this term in office. We are sticking to the terms of which are laid out inside of our platform. Oftentimes people say that election platforms don't mean anything, but after this first term of the Progressive Labor Party in office, people will know that our platform means something, because we tick the boxes every single time that we complete a task, and that's what guides us in moving our agenda forward.
So does that mean possibly during the second term, if you get a second term by the people, that independence could be on the cards?
I think that any measure or move towards that has to be predicated by a number of items. But let's be clear, Don. I think there are far more important issues than independence that we have to address. We have an economy that is still hurting. We have an education system that we need to fix. We have antisocial behavior, which we still have to take care of. We have an aging population. We have an an aging infrastructure. We have a debt that we have to get under control. There are lots of different things. And that's why I say, when I say that independence is not part of the government's agenda, there are many other things that are laid inside of our platform that deserve our attention. It is my view that if we get the governing right, then the conversations around what our next constitutional steps may be, whether that's independence, whether that's associated statehood, whether or not that's just amendments to our current constitution, all those particular items will happen in their due course. But right now, we're focused on fixing what needs to be fixed in Bermuda and making life more comfortable for Bermudians.
Now, one of the things that you ran on the platform, you mentioned education twice already, is fixing it. And you talked about getting rid of the middle schools or absorbing them into the secondary schools or turning them into executive schools. What's the progress on that at this point?
That is an incredibly complex issue. I think the minister brought a paper to cabinet a couple of weeks ago, and I know the minister will be discussing his plan forward on that in Parliament in the very near future. Any change to our school system has to be done with a measure of full consultation, understanding that is backed by research, and make sure that whatever changes that we make are right and proper for the country in its context. But I happen to believe that we have the ability to transform the way in which we deliver education in Bermuda, and we can do a better job of it. And I know that the minister is committed to that. Just as an example, we have followed the same path of education that we have for a long time, whether or not you talk about we have education on an agrarian calendar, where, you know, summer, where students used to have the summer off so they can work crop in the field, you know, help with farming in the summer. I mean, there's many different things of which we are doing in 2018, which are maybe better suited for 1918. But when you look at the success of some programs that the Progressive Labor Party introduced in its last term in office, we talk about the dual enrollment program, where we have students that are getting college degrees when they're graduating from high schools. In my view, that should almost be the aim of everyone. And we should look to find out how can we expand that, how can we change our delivery of education so that when our students are even leaving their high school or the amount of years that they have in school, they can have more qualifications and be more prepared for the workforce. There's been many persons who have been crying out for alternative forms of education, things that are focused more on technology and business, things that are more focused on the trades, etc. Those are all the things of which we'll take into account to make sure that we're delivering the best system for Bermudians. We believe that our system can be improved, and we're going to go through that process. It'll be an extensive 2-year consultation process, but we are determined to get it right.
Now, both at Cedar Bridge and Berkeley, which are fairly new schools compared to everybody else, they've had a lot of money invested in them and better technology. If moving to more secondary schools, how will those other schools be able to compete as far as being able to offer the same sort of facilities and programs?
I mean, I'm not going to prejudge what's going to come out of the review, but I think what is clear is that, and I said this during the debate with the airport, there was this whole conversation about how we needed a new airport, and what I said is that every single primary school, with the exception of Prospect, is older than the existing airport facility. And so there will be a chance and an opportunity to certainly build new schools, because that's what's necessary. And so, but that's all part of consultation. That's all part of understanding the total picture of what we have and picking the best way forward. And I think the Minister of Education understands my views and desires in this particular matter. And I'm confident that he has the correct plan to consult widely and to make sure that there is broad public buy-in in where we're going forward. But I think that what the people of this country want is a public education system that they can trust and rely on, that delivers for their students, that delivers for their children. I've committed to have my children in public education, and we're going to make sure that it is the best possible system.
The former Minister of Education, L. James, back in 2010 raised the idea of closing some schools. How might that play out in a possible reorganization?
I can't speak to that. As I said, that prejudges any consultative process.
Okay. You mentioned the sugar tax earlier. There's a little bit of yin and yang going back and forth in the community with, some people think education's the best manner. The government's obviously gone forward in a two-step phased approach of bringing in the tax. Why do you think this is so important to do this, and do you think it's really going to change people's buying habits?
Will it change people's buying habits? Absolutely. That has been demonstrated via empirical evidence in many different places, and so that's the fact. I mean, I can just state, if you have $5 and candy costs $1, you can buy 5. If you have $5 and candy costs $2.50, you can only buy 2. That's just the nature of how that works. But here is the biggest issue. The biggest issue is that we have a problem when it comes to healthy living in Bermuda. And if we're talking about making sure that we fund education initiatives, if we're talking about making sure that we fund initiatives that can lead to reduction in prices of healthy foods, that money has to come from somewhere. In our platform, we said that we would introduce a sugar tax, and the proceeds of that sugar tax would come towards healthy education and healthy living initiatives. We have made the commitment that 100% of the proceeds will go towards that. That was the commitment that I made in the House of Parliament. That was the commitment of which we made inside of our platform, and that is a commitment of which we will execute on. And there are many ways to assist, whether or not that's in information and education, whether or not that's in things of which they do in other countries, such as publishing, the calories in certain food items and different things on menus and otherwise, whether or not that is supporting initiatives here locally, whether they be vertical farms or otherwise, that will lead to more domestically produced produce, which may reduce the costs of healthy eating here in Bermuda. Those are all things of which the proceeds for the sugar tax can be for. But I think that we have to recognize that if there are things of which we want to do, we must find a way to pay for them. And I think that it is understood that the very excellent place to start is, very sweet and sugary drinks, which are a contributor to a very big problem which we have in this country, and that is diabetes. Diabetes is the treatment of diabetes and the treatment of dialysis is taking up about $70 million, 10% or maybe it's even higher of our healthcare budget. It is an extreme amount. So we have to start somewhere. There are many other places where we have to tackle. The sugar tax will not be the end or this phase of the sugar tax, but we have to make sure that we have a healthier society. The government has committed to lead by example, and we're going to keep our pledge to use all of that money towards promoting healthy living activities.
I guess one of the biggest complaints that some of the people have is like a bag of sugar is going to be affected by the tax as well. Mm-hmm. And they figure like people who are trying to lower income, they can buy the bag of sugar and they make items with it, and it's a cost saving rather than buying whatever the treat is that they may have purchased. How would you respond to that?
The only thing in which I can say is that the impact of the desired effect of the sugar tax is for people to consume less sugar. It is proven that sugar is not healthy for you, and we want people to consume less of things that are not healthy for them.
The other thing, you had a list of products that are now going to be discounted, staple food. How are you hoping for people to purchase those items? And just for our viewers, since I don't know all of them, what are some of the things that they're going to get for?
Off the top of my head, Don, you've got me. I know that we reduced the duty rates to 0 on a number of healthy foods, whether it be broccoli and different vegetables and other items. I know
Potatoes.
That was reduced. I really don't know off the top of my head, unfortunately. If it was budget time, I could have told you because it was the budget speech. But as they say, I've been asleep a few times since then. But what I can say is that's just the start. Because as you heard me say before, there are additional things of which we can do to lower the cost of food in Bermuda. One of the things you'll know, cost of living is a very big and important item. The Cost of Living Commission has been meeting. I spoke to the chairman of that commission yesterday. He has said that there'll be an interim report that will be delivered to the government in the fall, and we will look to start to implement steps of how we can tackle the cost of living. But if we want people to eat healthier, we have to make healthier food more affordable, and that is our commitment.
I think one of the items on the list, and I could be wrong, but I believe one of the items on the list was eggs.
Possibly. I don't know.
Okay, but we have the egg farm that the Smiths run. So now they're going to be competing against somebody who's being able to bring in the eggs for cheaper, and they're already cheaper to begin with. What can we do to help promote local people who are actually growing things here? The local products, that they're not outdone by foreign competition?
What I would say is that the best way to make sure that companies are competitive locally is to take advantage of the manufacturing concessions which are inside of the tax code or inside of our customs tariff. That's one of the things of which we are doing for the sugar tax for those persons who are manufacturing items here on island to give concessionary rates. And what I would say for those persons who have that particular concern, they're more than welcome to contact the Ministry of Finance to find out if there's anything additional that we can do to assist them. The Junior Minister of Finance, Wayne Furbert, is very effective on those type of things. He's been very effective in marshaling the sugar tax along with the Minister of Health, and we're happy to take any comments or feedback that companies feel that can assist them in a better way.
The Supreme Court last week issued the ruling on same-sex marriage. In hindsight, would you have done anything differently?
I don't believe so. I believe that, as the Minister of Home Affairs said, that this was a compromise position attempting to reconcile two irreconcilable positions. And the fact is that the Progressive Labor Party government's platform in the election said that that was the step of which we would take. We executed on our platform promise, and now there has been a question about whether or not the judgment or what was done was fit and proper. We have indicated that we will appeal that decision. I think that the history of the decisions of which have been made by the Chief Justice in this matter has shown that a number of them have been overturned on appeal. And from our perspective, that is the position of which the government is going to continue. But I think what's most important is to understand and to recognize is that I would like to see that this issue is finally arbitrated so that we can focus on matters which I think have more impact and reflect on people's lives. And those are the issues of growing the economy, fixing our education system, and reducing crime and violence inside of our society and addressing the challenges with our cost of living. And so from that particular aspect, it's not something that occupies a great deal of time in my day. The Minister of Home Affairs, the Attorney General, will review the judgment, will give the legal advice appropriate, and that matter will proceed through those courses.
Now, the amount of complaints on Facebook from outside Bermuda has been pretty great on this issue. You know, a lot of people say that they weren't going to come to Bermuda or they canceled their trip. Whether or not that's true is a different story, whether they actually were planning to come here. But there have been, the hotels have suffered some losses because of the legislation. How do you think that they should react to that, and how can they counter this negative publicity, or how can the government counter this negative publicity that we've received?
I'm not going to necessarily speak to and or give advice to hotels. What I will just continue to say is that the government had a position that we were elected on by the people of this country. We are following through on our platform promise. That is what must happen inside of democracies. You must hold true to the promises which you make to the electorate. And what I would say is that Bermuda continues to be a welcoming country, and we are. And the message is very plainly and simply, as I've said on numerous occasions, we are the first English-speaking Caribbean country to give legal recognition to same-sex couples, and that is a place that that a lot of our competing jurisdictions cannot state. And so, from that particular aspect and that particular perspective, we are comfortable with keeping our promises to the electorate, and this item will move forward. But I think that there are other items to focus on, and I do not want people to think that this is occupying a great deal of the government's time, because it is not.
One of the things that you talked about in your campaign promises was a livable wage. What's the progress on that?
The Livable Wage Committee, which is set up as a committee in Parliament. The chairman of that committee is Mr. Rolf Commission. They're still waiting for some additional statistics to come from the Department of Statistics that are collating some items regarding the low income threshold to make sure that we can make the appropriate recommendations. And I would expect that if that is not tabled before Parliament rises or the House Assembly rises on July 20th, that we'll see it tabled soon thereafter. It has been delayed. We would have hoped that it would have been done sooner. But one of the things in which you learn in government is that as many things that you may be ambitious in wanting to do, there are certain things that are regularly done by government, such as the Department of Statistics, insofar as compiling statistical information. So you have to almost wait in time for certain resources to be made available. But the minister who has responsibility for statistics has been working with that committee to ensure that that information is provided, and when that information is provided, they will make their recommendations, the government will consider it, and then we'll move forward in addressing this particular issue, because I think it's something that is important. We committed to implementing a livable wage, and we will keep that promise.
Now, on May 25th, when I was covering the holiday...
May 25th.
May 25th. I went to a restaurant, and it had a foreigner working the counter, and I said, well, at least you're making time and a half today, working the holiday, and they told me no. And then they told me they were making $8 an hour. You know, and I was sitting looking at that, I'm going, well, no wonder no Bermudian wants that job at $8 an hour. What do you think a good threshold? I know the committee's going through there, and I've heard a range of like $20 to $22. Where do you think that range is probably going to end up falling?
I'm not going to prejudge whatever the committee's work is. They've been the ones who've been looking at the figures. They've been the ones who've been consulting with the private and business sector, so they would be the ones that can answer those questions best.
Do you think that's probably going to be a phased-in approach as well?
I cannot tell you because I do not know what's coming, and the one thing that I do not do in this office is prejudge the results of what may come from consultation.
You talked earlier about crime. How's the government addressing that? How do we help some of our young men find a path where they don't look as being part of the gangs as part of a viable option for them?
Well, the most important thing is to provide jobs and opportunity, and I think that is what we've done. We've taken a different approach regarding crime. We've always said that we must tackle the root causes. That's the reason why you've seen us put additional funding into education, additional funding into training and retraining. We have made sure that we've increased the availability of that. We said that we would appoint a gang violence reduction coordinator. In our first 100 days, we did that. Pastor Leroy Bean is doing excellent work in attempting to reduce the tension between the gangs in Bermuda. But what we have to do on a follow-up to that is provide those opportunities, and that's where we're focused on growing the economy. So when you talk about things such as construction, when you talk about things such as the Bermuda Infrastructure Fund and the work that they're doing with the Minister of Public Works, which you'll be able to announce in the near future, that there will be a major infrastructure project that will commence soon that will provide jobs and opportunities for those persons. That is something that was done under this government with a Bermuda Infrastructure Fund that the former government would not complete. But what we said is something that we have to do. We made the investment, we put the skin in the game, and now it looks as though if that is going to be able to bring some jobs and some investment in much needed infrastructure in the near term. So I am pleased that those type of things are progressing, and that's the way you fix the problem. The way you fix the problem is providing that opportunity, and that is what this government is focused on doing.
With the last week's announcement of the Portuguese holiday, how are you seeing the party as a whole try to be more inclusive and reaching out to people?
I think that the Progressive Labor Party has always been welcoming, and that is, you know, a misconception. I mean, it's very funny when you hear the comments of the misinformed on the other side who want to cast aspersions on our party as them. But when I sit in my executive meeting, not everyone around that table looks like me, and that's just a fact. And the fact is that we are a party that we cannot negate the history. And the history has been that persons who are not black, who join the Progressive Labor Party or who represent the Progressive Labor Party, suffer negative repercussions in their private and business lives. That's been the history of the oligarchy in Bermuda, and we will, at some point in time in the future, hopefully get past that. But regarding the Portuguese holiday, the fact is that the Portuguese have played a role in Bermuda's development, and one-time holiday, I think, is a fitting recognition of that. What we have to do if we're going to make it to the next constitutional step is recognize that we must celebrate our differences internally and recognize that there are many parts of the Bermudian story, whether they be from the cultures that I descend from from Africa, whether it be the cultures that you descend from, Don. I can say I don't know your heritage, but it may be European. If there's those that are Portuguese, from those from even South America or Southeast Asia. We have lots of different persons that are Bermudian, and for those persons that are Bermudian, I think that we must celebrate all of our cultures. But at the same points in time, the celebration of a Portuguese holiday is not going to fix the challenges which are faced inside of the black community. And I think that the persons that have some concern about the Portuguese holiday, their concerns are valid, because there is still structural racism that exists inside of this country. There is still discrimination that happens, and it is our responsibility, the government, to fix it. I think what you find very interesting is the comments from, I think in a news article today, which spoke about someone at Hamilton Reed talking about that companies need to do a better job of diversity. That is the message of which I deliver at every point in time when I speak to executives in international business. I say that in other jurisdictions, you're required to make sure you have diversity policies in place, to make sure that there are those policies, that you review them, and to provide opportunities to the other persons who would not have that opportunity. Companies are doing a better job of responding, and that's what's necessary if we are going to make sure that Bermuda is a more inclusive society.
Well, last week as well, the Bishop of the Catholic Church spoke to the fact that they're going to go through a 6-month process of trying to address the historical racism that they've had. How do you see this as a positive step forward then?
It is a positive step. It's a positive step when we acknowledge that racism exists and that we have to take actual active steps in which to fix it. The fact is that discrimination of which exists because of actions of the state that was made in previous times, and that discrimination is not going to be reversed without actions of the state. That is the reason why you have seen with our code of practice of procurement, where it actually for the first time states that we are going to give additional points in preference to businesses which are owned by those persons of African descent who historically were cut out of those opportunities. That is the only way that you're going to redress that balance, and we are not going to be apologetic about advancing those particular initiatives.
Let's talk a little bit about immigration as we have a couple minutes left.
Time goes very fast.
Well, that's because we're good banter back and forth.
My apologies.
You've talked before about, because of the aging population, we need to increase our population base to help pay for the infrastructure and the programs, the pensions. How do you see making immigration more available to people who already have a long tie to Bermuda, either through family or they've been here for a long period of time, more accessible?
I know that the Minister of Home Affairs, who has responsibility for immigration, has the Immigration Committee. It's bipartisan. There's 2 members of the OBA and there's 3 members of the PLP on that. I did ask him yesterday what's the status, and he's expecting that report will be done shortly. But I think what's most important is that there's this misconception about immigration and that will fix our economic problems. Our problems are jobs. It's not immigration. It is jobs. We must create more jobs in Bermuda that will provide opportunities for Bermudians to fill them, and then when those persons are employed, that will require persons from outside. Our issue is not the amount of people in Bermuda. Our issue is the amount of jobs in Bermuda, and that's why we're focused on our things, whether it be through the infrastructure fund, whether it be through Fintech, whether it be through economic diversification. Those are the things which we're focused on to deliver more jobs for the people of Bermuda.
As we wrap up here, a lot of other countries are having to worry about technology, people being replaced by jobs, the self-checkout kiosks, or robots coming into the workforce to do things, or Uber using driverless cars. How can we still create jobs but be embracing of technology?
What you have to recognize is that there'll be different jobs in the future. And so one of the things when we went to the World Economic Forum in Davos, there was a company, Cognizant, which stated, the 21 jobs of the future. The fact is that there was a big thought that the Industrial Revolution would lead to the end of people working, and it actually create additional economic growth. The technology revolution, which is continuing, will be the same. The responsibilities of government is to make sure that that pie is shared as widely as possible, to make sure that it does not lead to increased income inequality, to make sure that it provides additional opportunity, and to make sure that people can be involved. We want technology to make people's lives easier. We want technology to make government's lives easier. But we also have to recognize that with technological change, there'll be a change in requirements for the type of skills in order to be employed. That's why we've put so much money into training and retraining, and that's what we will continue to do. So I think those fears are natural, but I think that history has shown that there are new and different types of jobs that are created.
Well, thank you, Mr. Premier, for joining us
You're
today.
not going to ask me who my World Cup team is?
Well, I did have that on my list as a lighter
The World
question.
Cup apparently has started today. Someone told me, and I was like, oh, okay.
You've been too busy. Who's your World Cup team?
Well, as most people know, that I'm a proud West Ham supporter, and the captain of the Senegalese team is Sheikh Kouyaté, who plays for West Ham, and so I will be supporting West Ham, and I'll be supporting Senegal in this World Cup. Looking forward to it. Hopefully get to see a match or two.
I'm going to be rooting for Mexico just because it's a
Mexico.
CONCACAF nation,
Okay.
so somebody from our region hopefully to do well.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, again, thanks, Mr. Premier, for your time.
Thank you.
And I appreciate, you have a busy schedule. You've got another appointment to go to right now. But for everyone who tuned in today, thank you for watching this special with the Premier on Burt News, and hope you have a rest of a beautiful day.